Welcome, everyone. It's Osquery office hours, mid-February 2021. I hope everyone's having a good year so far. Start off with our customary announcements or highlights. I don't think I've got much. We pushed, I think everything got pushed to stable, maybe since the last meeting, maybe just before it. Nothing seems to have exploded, so that's always good. Next up, questions, issues, PRs, anything community folks want to bring up. I kind of mostly see the usual suspects here, so. Agenda stuff. So I put up one agenda item, and maybe I can stick in a second one too. So one thing maybe is we should think about cutting a 470. It's been about 2 months. There have been 88 commits. I've got one PR I'd like to get selfishly merged in before we cut a branch, but you know.
You have a 4.7 milestone.
I don't even know if I've made a milestone yet.
I feel like we usually make one after the last release just to kind of push everything forward.
Yeah, there's a 470 milestone. Beautiful. See what's in it.
Well, let's add the PR that you really want.
Yeah, I'm just like failing on GitHub clicking right now. Excuse me.
No problem.
I didn't mean to add your floating point bug to it.
Steph, are there any blockers to getting your PR in?
No, someone's just got to thumb it. This is the one I added concat functions.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I think I meant to thumb that. You had replied to all my comments, so I'll have another look out.
I miss a trivial PR. I just you know, for us, there's always a very long tail on getting on being able to use functions that we introduce. So it's sort of I'm trying to add that so that, you know, in 6 months I'll be able to get rid of all of the horrific coalesce concat statements I have.
Yeah.
So you know, probably the rest of you are familiar with that.
Oh, I see. You mean because it takes a while to get all the agents updated.
Yeah. You know,
right.
The bulk of them will be up fast, but then there's like, when can we finally pull the trigger on that requirement?
I see what you mean.
But let's see, what are we likely to fix in here? I'm just skimming over the 470 So there's some weirdness about distributed queries and discovery queries, which I think the code's wrong. This is like a bug from 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I don't think we're going to fix that one before we cut a release. Testing new package, broken T2 tables. None of these look like low-hanging fruit to me. So unless anyone's got anything they want to squeak into a 470, I'm inclined to say we should just cut one in the next week and keep going forward.
So I was wondering if Alessandro thinks it's possible to resolve the conversations about the Chrome extensions table. We can get into a release and then get some user testing before we try to do anything else. Because I think that PR is effectively complete. It's just that we haven't had anyone tested in the field.
What PR?
The Chrome extensions.
Chrome extensions one.
Yeah.
Let's see.
It's a catch-22 because Osquery users want to test release versions, but new functionality needs testing. You know what I mean? Beyond the CI and things, and it has tests, but you know, like real-world testing.
So I think the only thing that so Teddy had requested changes, which I think you've all addressed. I never like dismissing his requests changes, so I mostly would say poke him on Slack or something, because I bet he'd thumb it, and I'd be down to say let's merge this and cut a 470. And then we can
tentatively can we add that PR to the milestone, and we will try to get this resolved in short time.
I'm clicking the buttons.
Cool.
But I think that's fine. We can get that one in. And if our early testing comes up with any problems, then we'll cut a 4.7.1 and move on with that.
I see there's like a add shell bags table from user Puffy Sid. It'd be a cool one to get in. It looks like it's just like we need to give it a review.
So it looked big, but isolated. And I wasn't sure if I wanted, I'm not sure I can review that usefully. So I'm kind of good either way. Like if one of you feels like you're psyched to look at it in the next week, that's cool. Otherwise, we'll probably aim to cut a release in about 2 months.
I just noticed it just now. I mean, I can have a look at it. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it particularly matters which release it goes into, but it seems like a nice little bit of functionality. I know people are interested in shell bags.
I've never heard of it, but it seems, seems well in keeping with our mission.
It's like artifacts of browsing files in Windows.
Mm-hmm. If you review it and it looks good to you, I think I'm fine. One of the things I always ponder is whether we want tables built on registry versus just sort of doing it that server side or query side. Shell bags looked complicated enough that having a table didn't seem unreasonable.
Yeah.
But, I'm just taking a couple notes on that. And anyone else want to argue anything for 4.7.0? Okay. The other kind of big, really neat thing happening is Alessandro's code signing and CI changes. I think there's maybe 2 discussion points here. One of them is just need anything? How you feeling? And the other one is kind of a little fuzzier of do we want to try and use any of that for 4.7.0? And if so, do we want to bump that? We've talked about when we changed the macOS signing key, bumping it to version 5.0. So if you felt like you wanted to use it, then maybe we would want to bump to 5.0, which is just arbitrary numbers.
So we still have to fill in the actual code to do the signing process. Only Windows has the right sign tool call to do the work. And I was actually going to ask if it is possible if we can invite Charville inside the code sign repository so we can fill in what we need and complete it. We can always rotate secrets or place some temporary ones.
I'm fine. Just add them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's good with me.
Yeah. You could add them directly. You could make a group. Sorry, go on, Nick.
On that discussion, there's plans to change the Windows code signing cert too, right?
I started looking at buying one and didn't get very far yet.
Okay.
So I got as far as asking the Linux Foundation if they had any preferred vendors for Windows code signing certs.
All right.
And I did that
They
2
say,
weeks
what's
ago.
Windows?
They didn't answer, which they often don't.
Okay.
They
I use DigiCert for mine, and they've been fine in the past. I don't really know if I have strong feelings about any one CA vendor in particular.
I don't. So Collide uses Komodo, which is reselling someone else, maybe reselling DigiCert. And I think I picked them because they were fast and easy, and I kind of hate them, but I kind of hate them all.
Sure. The reason I ask is if we are planning to have the 5.0 release be signed with a new macOS cert, it might be really advantageous to make that also be the one where we publish a new Windows cert.
Yeah, I keep thinking that and then not finishing getting a cert up. So that's
let me
on
know
me.
What I can do to help. I think my cert expires next month. So if we need to keep using my cert, I can renew it. I mean, there's no pressure here. Like I can renew it very quickly, and I can probably expense that through work. So I'm not really concerned with continuing to sign it myself. But just thinking like if there's already expectations that 5.0 is going to have new code signing identity, that's a great opportunity for us to do it on Windows too. So that way, any hiccups people hit with the new identity being propagated will make sense. Be like, oh, 5.0 has the new certs. Like, and we could probably have a blog post about that or something, because people will have questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a GitHub issue trying to
Good.
track
Right.
like the couple of places I know we have to change.
Sure.
The macOS community has asked us to update one thing for them. So maybe, so if I'm going to say we should cut a release in the next week, it may be a little ambitious to cut certs over. So maybe let's aim to have 4.7.0 on the existing flow, and then it can be the last one. Like,
yeah, I'd say it would merit its own thing. Like, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a rush to get new CI, new cert signing and everything into 4.7 if there's already a good amount of other stuff there. Like, that could merit its own major release, I think. Just my 2 cents, of course.
I think I agree. I mean, the only rush is that it'd be nice to do it.
Yeah, of course.
So, Alessandro, you said you were partly waiting on Charvel or something. Is this something I can help you with?
So I believe you have already added the secrets we needed. So we just have to wait for Charvel to call the code sign and GPG, I think, for Linux.
I mean, I can probably hand you the macOS commands. They're not hard. Just so I don't know what'll make sense for us. But I don't know if it might be easier for you to kind of coordinate with Charvel, since kind of work with him. I don't know. Like, you can always hit me up, but I don't know what's easier.
Yeah, I mean, we can maybe either make a channel or talk about this in core. You can coordinate with Charvel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Haven't stuck the passphrase on the Osquery keys into GitHub yet, only because I didn't think you were waiting on it, but we can add that whenever. Okay, well, those are all my agenda items. Anyone else have anything? Anything?
A little bit of a slow month, I guess.
You know, it's nice to have a slow week. I don't know if there's anything we can do to try and make things easier for FleetDM or for Trail of Bits or for Collide. So.
I'm just interested in what are FleetDM's priorities for the agent. Any?
Our priorities for Osquery?
Yeah.
At the moment, I don't think that we have any particular needs from Osquery. I mean, we could look at. I could come back and talk about what sorts of things our customers are interested in getting access to through Osquery. I don't think I have a good sense of that off the top of my head. But in terms of like core infrastructure kind of stuff, I don't think we have any particular needs at the moment.
There's one thing I'm starting to think about. It's really early for me, but this weekend I was looking at parsing the Osquery status logs, and they are horrific to parse. They're just like, they're nominally structured, but not usefully. So I keep pondering, adding a little bit more structure to the way some of our logging works. I don't know I'm not sure I'll do it, or if anyone really feels strongly about it, but if anyone else is actually trying to parse status logs, it's just all string parsing garbage.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that for sure, and that is something that we definitely hear from a lot of folks, like just trying to understand how and why things are going wrong. Issues with the watchdog, debugging issues with query performance, that kind of thing. Like, I don't think I have concrete steps there, but I think it all kind of relates to like, this stuff is all just dumped to the status log that kind of requires like an expert human to look at and try to make sense of. And any way that we could structure that information to help people understand, what failed and why would be awesome.
The thing I'd say is, so when things come in, and I'll be honest, I don't actually remember which things are coming out of Go SDK and which ones are coming out of Osquery, but Osquery to a TLS logger emits somewhat structured logs. So there's like a log message and a severity level and a host key and things like that. But probably the best single thing we could do is add the query name as a top level log key. Because right now you have to parse the query name out of the string message, which is inconsistent. So, I don't know if I'll do it, but it's kind of a thing lurking in my head.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that for sure. And one other thing that we've seen recently is that watchdog logs don't go to the TLS logger because logs get buffered to RocksDB, right? But only the worker process has RocksDB open, I think. And so when the watcher kills the worker, the logs don't get to the right place. I think there's something like this, which is a little unfortunate.
I think the issue might be also that the watchdog does not have any plugin initialized. So any plugin work will not work. For instance, on Windows, you are actually totally losing those messages just because you don't have any logger plugin initialized. And so, well, the log, when there's no logger plugin, it uses the syslog function, which though is only present on Linux and macOS. Now on Windows, it tries to use, it would use the logger, but there's no replacement for the system log or syslog function. Yeah.
Yes, that is what I was trying to refer to, but it sounds like you've got the details there, Stefano.
Yeah, and it's tricky also for Windows. Teddy and we made the choice because we wanted to have the watcher be light in that respect and have less things that could fail. But yeah, for Windows, there's really no way to log that if not by using what the logger plugin, the event system on Windows is there for. The event log, sorry, not the event system. And obviously, it's a bit more trickier than just calling syslog because then there's more setup. But
event logger, I've been very mixed on it. So launcher will log through event log is a thing I wrote years ago. And what I have found is that debugging stuff with customers is horrific, because like on Mac OS, I can just be like, here, send me this log file, and they'll send me a log file, and I can read it. But for event log, I'm like, run this command in PowerShell, and it will like print the last 10 log entries that match what I want, and it's much harder.
Yeah, or we can make our own function that writes on a file. Yeah.
It turns out to be tricky.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. It makes sense what you say, definitely. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I'm suggesting probably we should really think of just making a function that writes on a file, at least for Windows, so that we can get those messages. Otherwise,
I think we should think about bringing the plugins in, at least the logging plugin, because if we wrote to a file, the problem is that's gonna, if the watchdog wrote its logs to a file, but all the other logs were going over TLS, it's not gonna help anyone.
but are they? I think they are going through syslog. I mean, if on the watcher there's no TLS, no plugin in theory at all.
Right. I'm saying that I would argue that's a problem.
I see. I mean, okay, you want to have the TLS on the watcher and other things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see.
I mean,
I
it's going to
recognize
be
why we
tricky.
don't.
It's going to be tricky because of the RocksDB single handle thing. I mean, I don't know what's realistic, but what if we like wrote to a file from the watcher, and then the worker, when it starts up, like reads from that file and buffers anything into the logger plugin, and then clears it? Maybe that's a way to get around that. I don't know.
When you just said that, that's what it used to do. I swear there used to be some code where, like, on startup, it would look for older watchdog messages, and like maybe Teddy cleaned that up in the last major refactor. Okay, Teddy says I'm imagining something.
I think one other way is to do a light IPC. I think this was something Teddy mentioned. Yeah, between the watcher and the worker. So the watcher sends data to the worker, and also there are other use cases where the watcher could receive information by the worker, which we are not currently tracking. So this reminds me, it's sort of unrelated. It's unrelated with this issue, but the IPC is what connects those. But for instance, you can, if I recall right, you can have a query that blocks Osquery forever, and the watcher will never know about it because it can't see if the Osquery worker is alive. So with IPC, you could at least check that thing and other things.
I almost wonder if the watchdog could sit on the thrift socket in some weird way. Okay, Teddy says no, certainly not. Okay.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, the challenge here is to make the watcher as minimal as possible, because you don't want the watcher somehow being hung itself. And this is a challenge if you want to add IPC, because IPC has a lot of moving parts. So the solution is to find the IPC that is cross-platform, that is as simple as possible. And I think Thrift is just too genericized for our use, and we do too many things over Thrift. And there's too many checks to get it started, that if we used it to also communicate as IPC, then it would defeat some of the purposes of having the watcher.
Yeah, it feels like a trade-off, because we also want the watcher ideally to be able to monitor these interfaces. So there's like this big, I don't know. I'm pretty happy to defer to other people. I feel like a lot of this is both the history of how our code works, so fundamental deep changes are hard, and also what rope C++ has. So like how I might write a system in Go starting today is dramatically different than what we have in Osquery after 6 years of C++ development. I'm not meaning to say it's bad or anything, just, it's like I'm brainstorming needlessly.
I'm interested in what Stefano has to say about this, but I always bring my phone up sometimes when I'm just like, I have a couple free minutes. I start searching like simple IPC as a way to fix this problem. And the only thing I can see is like Boost's IPC, which I think is just a layer on top of a shared memory space that it uses to communicate, which is cross-platform, This has some cleanup work that we'd have to manage, but seems simple enough to solve this problem.
Is zero Q interesting? Am I remembering that right? As a name of a product?
0MQ.
0MQ. I remember they made a lot of splashing noise years ago.
Yeah, I think they work mostly with sockets, basically. Yeah, the tricky part always with IPC is finding something that's cross-platform, basically. So yeah.
Well, and
Because
also I think the other thing that's tricky is permissions. Like TCP sockets are cross-platform, but then you can't permission them properly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the Boost IPC interface looks pretty simple. So I think, I think we should at least explore what a prototype looks like there. I'm not volunteering to do that. I don't know, I have enough time to do that size of a development effort. But from everything I read about it and sort of the moving parts involved, I think one, it's easy because we already have a library, and two, I think it is minimal because it just uses shared memory, which we can access control.
So if we had an IPC between the watchdog and the worker, this is maybe a really naive question. What would we use it for? Because we got ourselves into this conversation by talking about getting the watchdog's logs sent out through the extensions. But if the watchdog had an IPC into the worker and the worker was hung, where would the logs go?
Yeah, I think the worker is used in probably two big scenarios. The first is that it observes performance violations from the worker, and then it takes action. I think that's mostly what people want to know about. So Osquery is still working fine. It can still log. It just maybe is doing too much work, and so you would use the IPC to just send the details of why the watcher thinks it violated some constraint. So what constraint did it violate, why it thinks so, and that it is going to take action. And that'd be really valuable to people. For the second one, that Osquery is hung, it becomes much more complicated, but we could maybe draw a squiggly line there where, most of the time it's hung because logging isn't working, or querying is stuck, but it may still be able to respond to the IPC and sort of just take those details and squirrel them away into the database so that when it gets restarted, it can then pipe them back out to the logger. So you're not going to see it in real time, but at least you'd have the details of what happened.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Could we save a file instead of using APC? And the reason I'm asking is that I was thinking about, I'm not committing to this right now, but I was thinking about improving the watchdog so that we actually have some visibility on what Osquery is doing. And my initial idea was to use perf, or maybe even BPF to capture stack traces before we take action. So we actually have some debug information. It's not really a real crash dump, but I mean, we could also take memory snapshot if needed. And if we had these files somewhere in a folder, when Osquery starts, it can just look for them and send them through the logger, which wouldn't require any APC.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of strategy I was envisioning, and I'm on board with doing something like that. It's certainly simpler, I think.
I mean, there are also other ways to do this. we could we don't have to take dumps or trace things dynamically. We could also just implement some sort of lightweight tracing, but this would require IPC. So we have some checkpoints in Osquery, and when we hit them, Osquery sends a message to the watcher. So the watcher has a rough idea of where Osquery is and what is happening. But it requires more iteration, of course.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting one to me because I've been thinking a lot about, you know, people ask me about performance a lot since I gave that talk. What was it? Osquery Performance at Scale, where I basically just like introduced the watchdog and the profiling tool, and it gets clear from what I've heard from folks that that's not enough because queries don't always respond the same in production as they do when you're profiling them. Events tables you can't profile at all using that tool. You know, various issues, but I'm very interested in ideas that folks have, like you just mentioned there, Alessandro, about how we could do better profiling of the you know, actual running OS query, and then potentially being able to report that through a logging pipeline or to a TLS server or whatever would be very, very interesting.
So another use case was to avoid killing Osquery if we know it is doing something important. So that watcher knows whether it is a good idea to kill it or not. If we are like doing compaction on RocksDB, it would not make sense to kill Osquery.
Yeah, so if I can interject here, I think we should separate out these two topics. One is like, how do we communicate back and forth between the watcher and the worker? And two is like, how do we get better performance monitoring and then log that out? They're definitely related, but I think if we solve a problem for the first one, then the second one becomes easier to reason about. I want to maybe push back a little bit on the file-based approach, because I think one way from watcher down to worker makes a lot of sense. But if you want to go the opposite direction, like give heartbeats back or mention that Osquery is doing something that's critical, that becomes a bit more challenging. I'm not sure how you would. I'm not sure how you would.
I would do it from
the code.
monitoring.
What's up?
I would do it from the monitoring. There would be no communication from Osquery to the watcher. So, well, of course, if we have the checkpoint system, yes, that's one communication option. But a method I would prefer would be to use perf to trace what is happening.
I mean, that works for the Linux, but it doesn't work for Windows and Mac OS.
Yeah, but I mean, we can still enumerate the threads running, take the stack trace for each thread. And if we know that, if we see that there is one thread that is consuming a lot, but is inside RocksDB, we can defer this kill action.
It sounds a little bit more complex than using like a bit of shared memory for IPC.
Yeah, it is true. But I was trying to solve two different problems at once. The first one was to know what is happening and then avoid killing Osquery if it is doing something important.
Absolutely, yeah.
If important,
I'm not sure if it makes sense.
If important is mostly considered like RocksDB maintenance, then it's almost like we want to be able to communicate transaction state on RocksDB up to the watchdog.
Well, I think that we have plugins or rather extensions, and maybe we can even talk about core tables where you provide a query that is too broad. You stay inside the query code, the table code, for too much. Osquery will stop reporting and it will get killed. So that would be another interesting scenario I was trying to cover with this.
I'm a little bit curious about Osquery profiling. This isn't something I've done much at Collide, but when I think about profiling this, what this generally feels like is I just would want to do a slow roll to some hosts and look at general, like the Osquery schedule performance, and does the host, the general host CPU stat go to hell after it gets new queries? And I feel like adding a lot of complexity inside Osquery to try and monitor that, it feels like extra work. I mean, I don't know what other people do, and it maybe depends how big your deployments are, but I would just push a query out and look at for, Osquery schedule changes or CPU utilization changes or something.
Yeah, and I think that's a good step for sure, and we're working on making that easier for folks to do, using Fleet as a management server, and I think that's been the motivation for things like the shard key and in query packs going back many years now. But I think the thing that people come to is that they have discovered that this query is causing adverse performance issues, maybe because they've noticed the CPU stats have gone bad, or maybe because the watchdog is killing the query. And now they're in the situation where they're going, okay, this is instrumentation that I want, but clearly it's not working from a performance perspective. How can I understand what aspect of this query is causing the problem?
So
that I can make the compromise.
I'm a little bit, almost all of the performance things I have looked into Osquery boil down to things like the native APIs are slow. And occasionally it's like, oh, this is the ones that I have looked at, right? It doesn't mean there aren't others. Just, the ones I look at are either like, oh, you just tried to enumerate the entire file system. Yeah, it's going to take a while. Or let's see, there's that one. There's you just pulled the entire log history, so you're now shoving gigabytes of data through a small hose, right? There's another one. And, oh, it turns out that like the apps API or the users API on Windows is just slower than you might expect. So if you stick that in your join tables, it's going to take a while. And I don't know how to, something like that seems harder to really instrument well, because like, I don't know how to do that short of just looking at the code and being like, well, okay, I'll add some printfs or like some more timing information, or like, how do I do that generically without like a very deep knowledge of what all the code's doing under the hood?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm debugging such an issue, I'm almost certainly pulling up the code as one of the first steps that I take, but I'm not sure that that's really a desirable answer to give to folks in the community who are.
I agree it's not. I'm questioning whether there's ever going to be an easier one, because so much of Osquery is a very light wrapper around OS APIs. Like very few things seem to be issues like, oh, RocksDB is just slow for this kind of query, right? Like they're almost all like, well, you constructed this thing that hit this slow API a lot.
Yeah, so I think there are mainly three categories of performance issues, which is one is specific to the SQL query you are doing, meaning that you don't realize, especially with a join, but the table you are querying is being called the same amount of times the other table has rows. So sorry, if that table has 1,000 rows, you are calling 1,000 times the table. And I'm not sure this is always apparent. And I'm wondering if we can show that, like with the explain or something, have Osquery tell you what it is doing with that query. Also, well, other cases are, we can call them bugs. We have some table that maybe either say they have an index and they do not implement it, or they should have an index so that performance are better. And then lastly, definitely what Seth said, that there are slow APIs. So, I mean, I think that we can have both things, like, because you can have a profiling that says this specific function or this specific parts of code is taking that much time. But unless you are a developer and understand everything, you don't understand if that's correct. And it might be correct. And the problem is actually that part of code is called too many times.
So maybe a thing to do, just as you say that, right, is simple counting on how many times was this table called and like how long did it take. That feels relatively tractable, right? Because like you might, if you enabled some kind of profiling switch, well, I ran this and it was slow, and whoa, why is my users table called 1,000 times instead of once?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and that was sort of when Alessandro talked about adding some sort of trace points through Osquery. I was thinking, prime place to drop in some trace points would be like on the generate function for every virtual table, and then if we can, keep track of those calls, I think for sure that we'll find situations where tables are, generate functions are just called way more than people would imagine they are for the query that they wrote.
There's a temporary table cache in Osquery, and I feel like I looked at this a bunch and concluded it didn't always work right, and then couldn't understand what was happening. So like jumping to maybe an answer, but like there's definitely times when I think the table cache doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
So just another last thing, I remember that we also have dash planner, and while it can be useful maybe now, yeah, definitely it is a bit maybe too low level, because the planner will kind of tell you how many times in theory the table is called. You should, yeah, in theory you should see it, but yeah, we definitely want. It will be definitely better to have something that's more easily human readable.
How do you use that planner?
It's an Osquery flag, and so dash planner.
So like Osquery I dash dash.
So yeah.
Okay.
And then when you do queries, it will print out some information also about filtering.
I kind of remember that flag. It's used, there's one bit of code that changes the printfs based on it. I think it's like down in the virtual table stuff.
Oh, nice. I mean, this definitely provides some information. I'll be curious to look into this more, for sure.
And yeah, for the caching, I'm not sure. I mean, these would be that would be definitely, because the issue is that when you do a join, SQL I think expects to have like a table that's where its data it has been saved somewhere. So retrieving the data from the table is cheap, especially one row. Yeah. But normally it is not like that. We have to actually actively do something. And I wonder if there are then some issues with the data not being updated enough, or I don't know. I mean, it would make sense if you launch a query for the whole session of that specific query, there's a cache for a table. I'm not sure if there are issues in doing that right now, or if the context of the duration of the cache is bounded by something, like by each select you have in the query or things like that, and so it breaks.
I couldn't trace through what was happening. I just remember that it was supposed to be there, and like it might have to be enabled on the tables, but even enabling it didn't always work. And maybe you're right that it's like in the face of a sub-select, it does the wrong thing. I just don't remember. But yeah, I agree. I think one of the core causes to some of the performance stuff we see is just this idea mismatch between SQLite and Osquery around, where does data actually come from and how expensive is it to fetch? That's about all I got. I don't know if anyone else wants to bring up anything in our remaining minutes.
Are there any blockers to moving the packaging over to? Was this already discussed? Sorry, I'm just catching up a little bit late.
So there's a couple of things. Blockers is a strong word. It's been a little bit over 2 months since our last release. We've got 88 commits. We were talking about just cutting a 4.7.0 maybe this week. There's maybe 3 PRs we might try and squeak in. Somewhat orthogonal to that, there's Alessandro's work, which does not feel quite ready to use to build or sign something right now. So I think the sentiment of the room was that we should just cut 4.7.0 this week and aim to have 4.8.0 become our 5.0 release using Alessandro's code. I think probably we'd all hear a counter proposal.
I mean, what? Sure. I just wanted to know, like, if there was a blocker, or like what the next step is. And so if you guys have a next step, that sounds great.
I think the next step is Alessandro and Charvel attempt to get it a little bit further along. I may or may not be able to help, not clear.
So the Osquery packaging thing can be used like right now, even without using the code signing workflow. And the next steps in there are maybe another code review. And then what we want to do is pin the Osquery packaging version inside Osquery. Because right now, whenever you run the CI, it will just clone the head comment, which is not great.
This was, I think I left this as a comment somewhere in there, right?
I don't remember.
Okay. The packaging code shouldn't need Git, because it should be able to just grab the whole tarball and pull the version out of a build artifact.
Oh yeah, those are two different problems.
Okay.
So the first the first issue is that we want to link the Osquery packaging to the Osquery repository so that we know that they are kept in sync.
Do we?
Because if you were to try and repackage Osquery with the wrong Osquery packaging version, it will fail.
I'm not sure. Here's why. I can't decide. So I think as you wrote it, the Osquery repo drops the files and the control files and all the pre-inst and post-inst scripts into an artifact, which the packaging code then consumes, right?
Yeah.
So while I agree there's something a little bit weird about keeping them separate, like I don't know that updates to one necessarily have to be pinned to updates to the other, right? If we discover that we made a typo in some code signing script, like I don't know that needs to get back propagated into sort of an Osquery version. That's just a packaging code change.
So we actually have, it's sadly more complex than it looks, because so for the release packages, we can regenerate them at any time with Osquery packaging. But we are also running the packaging on master, because when we have to create the debug packages for deb and RPM, there is no way to generate them after the build has been done. So whenever we run the CI, we have to create the control data, create all the packages, because it's nice to have them as artifact, but also because the DDEB file and the RPM with the debug info needs to be reused as they are later on when we are inside the core, the other code signing repository. So we have this mix of persistent state where we have to save some packages as they are and some data that can be reused later on. So that's why they are kind of connected. which I know it sucks, but there's no other way, sadly. I also hope they could. So the first version of Osquery packaging was really nice because it would just take a folder as it is and copy the directory tree and repackage things. But then we have found a bug in deb and RPM that forces us to actually rerun the full CMake-based packaging process rather than just using CPAC directly. And so both Osquery and Osquery packaging have to exactly know what kind of files and how many of them we have to package.
I'm loath to suggest it, but this is probably part of why we use FPM here. It's kind of just to take this directory and pack it into an RPM or deb package.
I mean, we can still do it if we are willing to give up the back packages. That's the only trouble we have, which I don't think is solvable with FPM.
I think I think you were saying you have to release all the files on the Osquery packaging repo due to the fact that we have to use CMake.
It's mostly for the debug.
This is actually a very, very rare thing for me.
Because
I was thinking,
as far as I recall, it's just that some variables are not set unless you run CMake before it, right? And you don't need to list files. You can still use the installed. You can still use the directories, but yeah, definitely the debug info will still be an issue.
Yeah, so the trouble with, I believe it was named CMake install directories or something like this. However, the reason it didn't work is because it requires the usage of components, because otherwise the deb handler doesn't work correctly. And the only way I had found to make it work was through CMake, because we need the install component signature.
Yeah, but also that's not really a problem. So I was saying this as an answer, partial answer also to the FPM use. I don't think it will change anything because we still need to have the source folder with the sources, etc. Yeah, so it's not really it's annoying. We have to run CMake. We didn't want to run CMake. We wanted to use CPAC only, but running CMake just means we have to make a very light CMake list, and we do not have to release any files installed by the Osquery repo. And
the CMake is just a copy of some of the install directives, which is kind of different based on the package format we're generating. But yeah, it's really short. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, and another good thing about CPAC is, for me, I am paranoid, but it is nice to have something self-contained that doesn't require too many things that could lead to a supply chain attack, since we are burning the sending in there. Yeah.
I'm still basically in favor of doing whatever you think gets it out the door and iterating as we go. So it's great.
Folks have a couple more minutes. What about removing Azure from the CI? I know there's like some things we need to figure out to get GitHub into like a more perfect state, but are we comfortable removing Azure soon?
I mean, maybe we can remove the artifacts from Azure, but is it causing any specific issue? because one nice thing we could do is maybe free space from either of the two and use the additional workers we gain. Maybe we could just create a new Azure organization.
I would be in favor. Actually, I am definitely happy to have more workers and etc. Though I don't know. It's maybe managing the Azure organization itself, which might be a bit tricky. Also, you have limits with users. Like we are not many anyway right now, but I think if you are opening a free open source account, you have like 5 users that can be given a role.
Or something like that?
Hold on. So we talked about moving from Azure to GitHub. I think there's value in doing that just so everything is kind of in GitHub, and that's kind of in flight. And I'm interested in seeing that finished. Well, it's not because Azure is not turned off. I'm interested in seeing that finished just so it's not dangling. And then it seems like we've just segued into a conversation of whether keeping Azure around for additional workers and parallelism has value. And I want to be clear that we should call that out as a different conversation. And I don't know if there's value in that, so I don't want to commit to that. So I don't know where other people are. So do we think GitHub are we happy with GitHub as CI right now? Could we just turn off Azure?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything blocking that. We are happy with GitHub Actions, kinda, but I don't think there's many other choices. Mainly, we have double the amount of jobs, but then it mainly the fact that it likes to not stop previous jobs, etc. So it easily eats all your jobs. But yeah, this is not related with. This isn't a blocker for that. Sorry.
I actually wrote a script for that. We can commit it. So
nice.
It will look up all the workflows running on the same pull request and abort them automatically. So yeah.
So I would say that if we are happy with GitHub, then we should turn off Azure because that will be less confusing.
Yeah, I think I would advocate for that too. I think right now in watching the packaging change, Alessandra, I watched you implement it both in GitHub and Azure. So like you did double the work there. So I imagine other people or yourself will continue to do a lot of work there. So if we remove Azure, then you just do it in one place, so you save time. And my understanding is that Stefano does a lot of work to maintain the instance, and so this is just like sort of one-off work and some time that we could give back to you. And the downside of, like, I don't know if Azure is like surfacing problems that GitHub isn't. So are we going to lose some visibility into potential bugs if we turn Azure off? My understanding is that that's not the case. So we're safe to turn it off right now and give time back to everyone.
Yeah, no, the environment is basically the same. The VMs are, yeah.
I vote we turn it off.
We'll put a nice tombstone up that says, "Thank you so much for all the work that went into it. Saved our butts for a long time."
Oh,
remember also to activate the required checks on the GitHub Actions because they are not active. So
that's true.
Most of what we have in GitHub Actions is a direct port of what Stefano made for Azure. So it's not that, it's just moved.
Just to be clear, is anyone advocating we keep Azure in play?
Nope.
Okay, so then the next step is to make the GitHub. So let's see. Next steps. Make GitHub Actions required. Remove Azure Actions. I don't remember if that's a check, or if it I think it's probably remove it as a check and then remove the pipeline files.
And then we have to uninstall the org.
I think if you make a commit that deletes the files, that's enough. We just have to enable the required checks on the GitHub Action side.
Oh, and yeah, I have to commit a script to abort previous jobs.
That's just improvements.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, it will, if we don't do it, it will be really bad.
I know I would take advantage of it. Nice. Cool. Thanks, folks. That's awesome.
Thank you, Daddy. I can try and just do the Gazor to GitHub cutover. That sounds like 30 seconds of button clicking.
We also have to change, I'm sure, I think Stefan was the code owner for the Azure things. We have to move it to the GitHub stuff.
Which kind of?
You're talking about the Docker images.
That too, yeah.
Oh,
but also the code owner files. I guess it was set on the workflows for Azure.
I don't care what the Azure ownerships are.
Yeah, but we have to move it on the GitHub Actions files for Stefan. So it's pinged whenever it's changed.
You mean the
Oh, I know what you mean. So just PR something. If I remember, I'll PR it when I remove the Azure stuff. If you want to just PR it, just PR it. I'm not sure how much that ends up mattering. We just don't seem to do enough PRs. But by all means, I would approve that. Okay, I will try and do the GitHub Azure thing this afternoon. And after we maybe get 2 or 3 of these PRs in, I'll cut a release this week, or at least do the tagging and changelog steps. You know, I'm sure we'll yammer about it on Slack. So, okay, thank you all.
Sounds good. Thanks for all the help. See ya.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.